Hi Len, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on this morning and late night for you.
It's not that late, but thank you for having me. It's the middle of the afternoon, like 4 o'clock, 4 p.m. in the
Perfect,
evening.
perfect. So we can still have brain power available to you.
Somewhat. It's starting to fade a little bit because it's been a long day, but it's Friday, so it's all right.
Yeah. I don't know what's worse, early morning or late afternoon when you're just sort of wanting to wind down and you can't.
It depends on your DNA. It depends what kind of person. Sometimes you're a morning person, sometimes you're an evening person. Depends when you have, most of your brain power going.
There you go. We can also jump into that later. So today we're here to talk about cannabis. We're here to talk about genetics and cannabis. And I am super excited to be talking to you about all of this. And you are the expert. I've done a little bit of research over the past sort of 8 months or so, but I definitely don't know anywhere near what you know. So I am really hanging to pick your brain, put it that way.
Great. Pick.
So we'll start off with a bit of history about yourself. How did you become interested in cannabis? How did this path lead you to this point?
Yeah. So I was a kid that would go to school and would sit in class, and then all these thoughts would pop into my head. So my brain would travel in different directions. And so I was diagnosed with ADD, attention deficit disorder. Without the H, I wasn't hyperactive. And I was as a teenager, I was put on all kinds of prescription medication. And I was hanging out with some older kids, and one of them asked me if I wanted to smoke a cigarette. I said, yeah, sure, I'll be cool, smoke a cigarette. And they passed it to me, and I inhaled it, and it wasn't a cigarette. They filled it with cannabis. So I went back to class, and all of a sudden, my windows that were in my head like narrowed in, and it became small, so I could focus. So it kind of became my go-to medicine. And from there, I was a consumer, and my parents didn't really like that too much. So they would catch me, and I would get in trouble, and they end up actually kicking me out and calling the police on me. And the irony of it is that, yeah, I know they consume formulations that I created now. So it all kind of came full circle. It's just interesting. The stigma associated with that. So I became an activist. I was the president of something called the Cannabis Action Network. So we fought for legalization. I'm from Philadelphia. I lived in Philadelphia in the U.S. I was actually born in Lithuania and immigrated when I was 6 years old and grew up in Philadelphia. So where the Constitution and Declaration of Independence are, all on hemp paper, by the way. We held the rally in 1993, 94, some of that. And then moving to Los Angeles about 12 years ago or so, I got into the dispensary space and was able to really see the therapeutic properties of this plant firsthand by seeing hundreds of people. But the one thing that I kept kind of stopping and pausing is that two people with the same symptomatic condition would take the same exact chemovar, or a strain as you would call it, and it would have a completely different experience. And it was mind-boggling to me. So my kind of ADD is like, I'm either multitasking, my superpower, or I can hyper focus on something. So I started being obsessed with trying to figure this out. I came across a video by a gentleman that was genetically sequencing cannabis. And I went and anyway, ended up working with them. And my job was to travel around the US and Canada and get plant material. I would extract the DNA from there in my lab, and I would purify it, and they taught me how to do that, and I would send it to a genetic sequencer. So we started the first cultivar chemovar library called Cannapedia, so we can see strain names. So for those of you that know, like, we call these plants different strains, which I never understood the name, because the word strain refers to a virus, and this is far from a virus. Actually, it should be called a chemovar, which is short for a chemical variety or a cultivar, but we call it strain, so we'll go with that for the time being. So I would pick like 5 blue dreams, bring them in, genetically sequence them, and say, okay, 2 of them are identically genetically, then 2 are similar, cousins, related, and 1 is not even that. So in doing that, I started seeing that it is, the plant names are different. But then we had a meeting at Harvard Medical School with doctors that were treating kids with epilepsy. And they were treating kids with epilepsy using CBD. And a lot of them were saying they go from 100 seizures to 0, but then we had some outliers. And some kids, the seizures would either come back or it wasn't working for them. So when we genetically sequenced the kids, pharmacogenomics, we saw they had biomarkers that were in common for a form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. And we published an article on that. And then GW Pharmaceuticals picked up on that, and they started focusing on the product that got past the FDA, which is Epidiolex versus Sativex. So that's when I had my aha moment. I said, well, if there's one biomarker, maybe there's other biomarkers. I approached them. They said they wanted to focus on a plant. So it gave me the opportunity to take some scientists with me and launch our company, Endocanna Health, in 2017. So it's a long-winded story, but that's how I kind of got there.
That's amazing. And to be involved in the research and to be able to create all of that there. I have a question. It is phytofacts, because I came across that in some of my research. Is that anything to do with, because they distribute, you know, looking at those different terpenes and different cannabinoids. Is there something like that, like a database that you refer to or created in a way for strains?
For side effects?
For as in the strains or the chemovars, and to actually looking at those specific qualities in each of those strains. Is there anything like a database there? Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So it's not about the strain. So here's the thing with the strains. When you cultivate the plant, the further you are away from the seed, the more what's called genetic drift that you have. So just because you named it something, it doesn't mean that you're going to have consistency. It's a plant. So it always changes. You can get the ideas of what that plant is going to be based on, you know, the name and the terpene and the cannabinoid profile. So there are databases like that. There's like Leafly is one of them. It'll give you an indication of these types of strains are more associated with sedation. So they're more sedative. So indica leaning. And then these are more sativa leaning. But I want the audience and everybody to understand that it has everything to do with the combination of cannabinoids and terpenes, which are the essential oils that the plant produces. So the plant has its DNA. There's somewhere around 500 different components in the plant. So it has the major cannabinoids, the minor cannabinoids, it has flavonoids, it has terpenes, which are those essential oils. And the way they work together in concert, which you know, Dr. Ethan Russo called the entourage effect and all that. So the way they work in concert together is really the difference, and how that concert works with your own DNA is where you have the personalized experience.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, amazing. The quality, I guess, of the cannabis is, and knowing exactly what you're going to get. You know, there's the DNA component, and then knowing where to go or what to do and what to look for, and that then helps people, I guess, determine more individualization towards their cannabis medicine, making sure that it's actually designed for them, you know, after looking at the DNA.
Yeah, I mean, probably the best way, if I were to have a crystal ball, the best way is to formulate, right? So instead of just cultivating the flower that you can consume, smoke, which is fine, I have no issue with that. But in order to get consistency and to really use as a therapeutic wellness product, you have to be able to know, like a nutraceutical. Like you would go, you have vitamins and nutrients, you go to your vitamin nutrient shop, and wherever you are in the world, you would get the same exact consistency, because it's, you pull the plant apart and you put it back together to its precise components, and you're going to get precision every single time.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. So, you know, it fascinates me, the fact that this plant can be so absolutely amazing, and then the stigma behind it has been there for hundreds of years, really. So where do you see that sort of, you know, coming from and looking forward? And I know there's lots of movement in the space right now, but is it going to be still this slow moving, or do you think we're really getting speed on this at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that the new administration in the U.S., as you know, as much as people, you know, governments want to control their own destiny, everybody looks to the U.S. All policy globally stems from the U.S. drug policy. It happened like that for, you know, many, many years, and they just take the cue from that. I believe the new administration is going to do something. What they're going to do, I'm not 100% sure. If I had a crystal ball, and I would just like say, okay, what I think is going to happen is they're going to decriminalize it the same way they're going to remove prohibition and allow the states themselves to govern how, because the US is interesting. It's like we have states, but they're all like individual countries. They're run individually. They have different you even speak differently. It's an interesting place like that.
Yeah.
So they're going to be able to develop their own guidelines for distribution. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to have interstate commerce between friendly states. So New York is looking to legalize, and they're already talking to the bordering states of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, to see if they can create some sort of pact so interstate commerce will happen. So I believe that's the first move. How to implement that? It's interesting because now even states are legal. There are states like New Jersey, and they still don't have a program set up. So there's a lot of political maneuvering. Even when they decriminalize it on the federal level, I think it's going to take a while to implement. And the first act that needs to be taken is we need to be able to tax and bank properly, just like any other business. And I think once the money starts flowing, all the regulations will start flowing, and it probably be dual paths. There'll be a pharmaceutical path, which will be individual components, which is already happening now.
Yeah.
And then there'll be more of a nutraceutical path, which is the combination of all different components, and there'll be, plant-derived medicine or therapeutics or wellness.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting to hear your opinion on that as well. Yeah, amazing. So talk to me a little bit about just picking apart what you said earlier about the dispensary base. So how did you get into that, and what does that look like now? For those who are listening in Australia, a lot of people don't even know what that cannabis dispensary looks like. So, and then we'll dive into a little bit more of the cannabinoids and then the terpenes and just their benefits individually.
It's an overwhelming experience for people. I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and she was like, going into a dispensary is just overwhelming. There's so much stuff. And I was doing this in 2009, 2010, around there. In California, we had Prop 215 and SB 420. So it was this bill that it's a non-for-profit. Everybody's a patient. You have to have a medical card. It was very easy to get a medical card at the time. So how many real medical patients we would get, who knows? Everybody has some sort of illness. My back hurts. Great cannabis. I'll take an ounce of that.
Yeah.
But so when you walk into a dispensary, the way you check in, they check your ID now because it's for adult use, or I don't like to say recreational because I don't believe it's recreational. Let's say 21 and over, adult use, and you show your driver's license and you come into a dispensary. Before, you have to show your driver's license and your medical card, fill out a form. You go into a dispensary, and then the dispensary is set up with different types of products. So you have flour, and you have flour in jars, or right now you can't touch, especially with COVID, you can't really touch it, but you can see what the flour will look like. They give you a description of what that name of that strain is, and you should have test results. So test results should be on all the packages, and the test results are certificates of analysis where they show you no pesticides, no heavy metals, etc. So you're getting a good, clean product. And then, in California, we're spoiled. We have everything from edibles to live rosin, which is basically taking the plant, pressing it with heat and pressure, and then being able to sorry, my dog just jumped on my lap and pulled my microphone, so I apologize. So and then you have like gummies, you have different tinctures, sublingual sprays, mints, soaps, bath bombs. You name it, anything you can possibly think of, they have cannabis in it. So
wow, all of the crew here in Australia are probably salivating, like, what?
Well, it's not only it's California, because when I travel to different states in the U.S., they don't have that type of variety. So we're definitely spoiled here.
That's incredible. That was another question of mine, is because cannabis is a bioaccumulator, and you have to be very careful of how and where you grow it. So that's something that I guess lack of regulation in places like Australia, when you're getting it illegally, you just don't know how it's been grown, what it's been grown on, what it's been sprayed on. We were in over in the eastern states of Australia, in sort of like the cannabis town over there, which is very unique in itself.
Yeah.
But they were saying that they were spraying it with drugs, the cannabis, to make it a little bit more addictive. So sometimes you just don't even know what you're getting if that's not being regulated. And that's where I think the importance comes from, actually, the regulation as well. But yeah, I think the heavy metals and the pesticides, it's a very real thing that people can get, exposed to, which is not great.
For sure.
You're trying to heal
Yeah,
yourself.
no, for
Yeah,
sure. For
yeah.
sure. Yeah. And also, people need to understand that it is a substance. It is whatever the definition of a drug is, it's altering. There's something that happens in your mind and your body when you consume. So you have to consume responsibly. Setting is important, but also other things that you put in your body, other medications, drug interactions, all those things are really, really key. So just being aware of how you consume responsibly is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive in before we go into the actual testing, and we will get there. But I have so many other questions for you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the cannabinoids, because when I mention cannabis to any of my patients here, or my clients, or colleagues over here in Australia, they think it's just cannabis. There's nothing else. There's maybe a CBD, maybe a THC they know about, but when you start mentioning CBG, CBM, so all these amazing other cannabinoids that we can be using. So maybe step me through some of the major ones that you've been involved in or know about.
Yeah, I mean, we know some of the major, like as you were mentioning, just so people can understand, when you cultivate the plant itself is primarily the active cannabinoid that controls the plant is CBG. And then from the CBG, you get the derivatives of that, which are the conversions of THC, CBD, THCV, CBC, all the different cannabinoids, but they all come with an acid molecule attached. So when you see it, it's actually THCA, CBDA, and those are the non-activated forms of the cannabinoids. There, like I said, there are over 400 to 500 different substances in the plant. We don't know what they all are. We can see them on different equipment when we look at what's inside the cannabis plant. We can see them. We're not sure what they are. We believe they're all minor cannabinoids that help the major cannabinoids to have some sort of effect, and they work in concert with the different terpenes, as I mentioned before. So when you take the plant itself and you heat it, there's a conversion. So the acid molecule drops off and you have conversion, like THC, THCA converts to delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. There's also delta-8, which is a little bit less an intoxicating version of delta-9. It's missing that one molecule. And then CBD, etc. But the binding to the receptors begins when that acid molecule falls off. So if you're just consuming the plant raw, it's going to be non-intoxicating because it doesn't have the receptor binding. Still very beneficial for many different things, but each one of the components heated minus the acid molecule has an affinity for a receptor. Some of them, we're not sure what receptors there are. Some of them, we think there's 3 receptor bindings for it to have an effect. I was watching a study, sort of participating in sidelines in Israel on cancer. And what they were showing is that it has to have 3 receptor binding areas to create what's called apoptosis, which is cell death. And then there's studies that are going on with the individual components. There's one on CBDV that is going on for autism, for instance. So there's an individual study there. We're looking at CBG isolated. We're looking at THCV, which has been shown to have appetite suppressant qualities. We're not sure because they're done either in a petri dish or they're done in a mouse study. They're not human studies. Even the studies that have been done on Epidiolex, you're looking at the published research, which is, as I mentioned before, it is an isolated CBD that's somewhere around 98% CBD. It's very, very hard to get naturally, and with some flavorings added to it, and it's specific to that Dravet syndrome. But the amount of it that you're consuming in the mouse studies, there was a lot of liver toxicity. Well, if you're consuming a heavy dose of anything, there's going to be liver toxicity. So we have to understand that the mouse studies versus the human studies versus how much you're going to consume, and also the individual metabolism. We all metabolize things differently. So if you're an ultra rapid metabolizer, you can take in some more and it'll come out. If you're a poor metabolizer, it'll stay in your system a lot longer and take longer to metabolize. So those are all different variables. I'm not sure if I answered your whole question about different cannabinoids or not.
I think we could be going on for a little while if we were doing all the cannabinoids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all of them have individual properties that are beneficial for certain things. We don't know what they are yet.
Yes.
There are studies in like the NCBI PubMed database. There are studies that are beginning, but they're really far and few between. And that's for many political reasons why that happened. In the United States, in order for you to conduct research on cannabis, there was only one source, University of Mississippi, that you go and you get cannabis. That cannabis is so different from anything that you would ever get anywhere else. Like you're looking at, a 7% THC, which is almost impossible. You can't replicate that anywhere. So even the studies that were done are questionable. The studies that have been done and more prevalent that we can see are with the two major cannabinoids, which is THC and CBD. So those are the ones that we can kind of point to. The other ones we're learning, and we're learning how they work individually and together.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting stuff coming through on the Delta-8 THC I'm hearing as well. Yeah, and even the consumer products, beers and drinks and, all sorts of stuff coming through on those, which is fascinating in itself as well. So when we're looking at, and we'll talk about the entourage effect from the amazing Russo as well, Ethan Russo, but he also talks a lot about the endocannabinoid deficiency as well. I'm not sure if we'll get into that in terms of the testing that you do and how that might align with how you can tell, in those sorts of ways. But what's your take on that endocannabinoid deficiency and the individualization between people?
Yeah, well, Dr. Ethan Russo sits on our science board. I have a lot of respect for Ethan. We just completed a study together that we'll be publishing soon. So we work together closely, and I definitely learn a lot from Dr. Russo. But I have a theory on this. The theory on, if you don't mind, can I take like a couple minutes just describing cannabis and the strains and all this other stuff, and terpenes, indicas, and sativas. So cannabis, there's a myth about indicas and sativas. There's really no such thing anymore. Okay. But if you look in the history, back when, as far as we can go to the beginnings of where we can trace to what's called landrace, which is the original like strains and chemovars, the original landrace were found in like Southeast Asia, where they had a harsher climate. There was 4 seasons, and that cannabis itself, it's really interesting because under stress, the plant begins to release and mutate and create these different terpene profiles. So when you stress the plant, it creates terpenes, and it's to protect itself from the different predators that are native to that specific region. Mm-hmm. And if you look at those specific indica plants that were landrace, they look different. They're sort of shorter. The leaves are fatter, and they express a really skunky, diesely smell. Mm. And when you isolate that and you start looking at the chemical profile, it's very high in a terpene called myrcene. And myrcene with the cannabinoids is a sedative. So it's very sedative. So those are the indica plants that came from there. The sativa plants originated more in a way more humid climate, like in South Africa, the Durbans, or in Hawaii or the Caribbean, like the Maui Wowies, etc. They stretch to the sun, and they have a little bit of a fruitier smell, which is the terpene profile that makes them, that provides like limonene is expressed in that, which actually boosts dopamine levels, so it gives you a lift up. Mm-hmm. For years, hundreds of years, we started breeding these plants for more higher THC levels, and we bred out the original indicas and sativas. So I want people to really understand that it's all about the terpene profile with the cannabinoid ratio that provides you the effect. In terms of cannabis deficiency. So my take on it is that we all, as your audience, you probably know, we produce our own endogenous endocannabinoids. There is indications from genetics why some people have more, why some people have less, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I also believe it has a lot to do with prohibition. And what I mean by that is, before prohibition, cannabis was part of our everyday life and our diet. Animals would eat it. It would be in our water supplies. It would grow wild, hemp, all that stuff. It will be part of our daily diet without us even consciously. It's not about, smoking weed or whatever it is. It's about consumption of this plant. And because of prohibition, I think that the phytocannabinoids that we were naturally consuming as our supplements, we start taking them. So the expression of the deficiencies became much more illuminated for us. And then there are definite deficiencies that are based on genetics. So I'll give you one specific one that we can point to right now. There's a gene called FAAH, F-A-A-H. So FAAH degrades, breaks down anandamide, which is the bliss hormone that is expressed mostly from the amygdala part of our brain. And anandamide, the word anan means bliss in Sanskrit. So this is our bliss hormone. So what happens is THC mimics the way anandamide works within our bodies. But what happens is, if we have too much FAAH, it's like the game Pac-Man. It actually eats up the anandamide. If we have too much of it, we produce less anandamide than the average population. And the opposite is on a different genotype for that when it's expressed phenotypically. So you can actually tell by genetic predispositions if you're prone to having less of some of the endogenous endocannabinoids, so you can see where you may have some deficiencies based on your DNA.
Yeah. Wow. Very well said. That's clarified a lot for me, even that history. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Len. That's really, really good. You're so knowledgeable. It's amazing. So following on from that, then dosing guidelines. Now this is tricky. Obviously you need to have the actual, like we were saying, the nutraceutical form or the pharmaceutical form to know exact ratios of certain things. It's very tricky, and we've got like the tighter dosing and all those sorts of things that we prefer to do with clients. Is there anything, and I know there's not already, but from your opinion, what's your take on dosing?
Well, I mean,
big question, I know.
my take on dosing is same as everybody, like low and slow kind of thing. I mean, there's been so many. Like Israel has this green book. They talk about milligrams per kilogram. I'm not a big believer in all that stuff. I'm a believer in, you got to look at several different things. Number one, you have to look at your own personal experience with cannabis. But based on what your experience has been. If you didn't have any experience, start low and start titrating. I would do higher CBD, lower THC. Number two, you should know what your pharmacokinetics are. And what I mean by that is, there's a series of genes called cytochrome P450 markers. Specifically, they provide they provide enzymes that metabolize different substances. So for THC, it's CYP2C9, for instance. So looking at that metabolism, it'll show you whether you are a normal metabolizer, whether you're a poor metabolizer, or you're an ultra rapid metabolizer. So understanding that, looking at what you need to be consuming, and understand that if you're a poor metabolizer, whatever the recommended dose is, I would start with half of that. And if you're a rapid metabolizer, there's going to go through you quickly. You can accelerate that dose as well. But you, with the information that you have, can feel empowered to make better decisions. And the third part of that is other substances. I mentioned it already, but if you're on prescription medications of any kind, some cannabinoids can actually inhibit the efficacy of your prescription medication and vice versa. So being aware of and collaborating with your healthcare professional. And if your healthcare professional is anti-cannabis, you may want to look for another healthcare professional if they're not open to educating themselves, because most healthcare professionals, a lot of them don't even know about the endocannabinoid system. I don't really blame them that much, because it was only discovered in 1992. But if every
physician only goes by, you know, I went to medical school 30 years ago and this is what I was taught. You have to be current. Like, look at what's going on today. You do continuing education, all that stuff. So you have to have a partnership. And this is the one thing that cannabis is a major, major asset for. It's to be able to take better control over your preventative wellness. So it's not about treating something that's acute. It's about going back to what is causing that on your skin. So a lot of people are like, oh, I have eczema or I have psoriasis or something like that. Well, there's a condition that is being expressed in your skin that starts inside your body. So find out what it is. Is it an autoimmune thing? Why is it autoimmune? Maybe it has to do with stress. Well, how would it possibly have to do with stress? And my mom always told me, she's like, you got to manage your stress levels, you know, do your yoga, do your meditation. Everything has to do with stress. And I'm like, she's right, but how? Well, one path can be, we talked about fa. So think about it this way. If we have a stressful event, somebody cuts us off in traffic, something happens. So we have all these different chemicals that are, expressed in our bloodstream. We have dopamine, we have norepinephrine, we have cortisol. All these things are expressed. Now our brain realizes there's no lion chasing us in the jungle. It's time to get back to normal, which it releases anandamide, which is getting us back to homeostasis. Now, if you have, like I said, too much fa or more fa than the average population, you break down more anandamide, so you're producing less anandamide. And if you're producing less anandamide, you're not subsidizing that with a phytocannabinoid like THC that mimics it. Now, after a while, you're storing more cortisol. You're storing more cortisol, you become more acidic. Your pH level goes up. Your immune system really doesn't like that, so it does an overactive immune response. And most of the time, you're going to feel that in your joints, and not the ones that you smoke, but your ankles and your elbows and all that other stuff. But in inflammation, because your immune system is addressing that. And that's where you can have an autoimmune response. And it can stem from stress. And what you're feeling is, I feel pain or I have psoriasis. But if you kind of track it down, it could actually be something that is unstable in your body, the immune system doesn't like. And you can kind of look at that as a phenotypic expression of a genetic predisposition as well.
Amazing. Wow. You tracked that very well. I could never have said that better.
I thought, I'm like, did I get lost somewhere? I was trying to figure it out.
That made complete sense. It's just whoop, 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 straight there. I love it. And 100% agree with you on all of that. And even the medical practitioner side of things as well, that we need to be actually on board with furthering our education, because it's something that's super important for what's going on now. The patients sometimes know more than them. So that's a bit scary. All right, so I think that was a perfect lead on into endocanna health, and let's give us a little bit of backstory on that, and we can maybe step through a portion of testing and what that looks like. So yeah, a bit of a backstory there, and then I want to dive into some of those factors that how it can actually help with opioids and cannabis versus opioids, and those who are more sensitive to those sorts of things as well. So that would be great. I'll leave it to you now.
Yeah, I mean, backstory wise, I think I already kind of went over what we did at Harvard Medical School. But here's the thing: how it's a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Luck has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
And it just, when you have an idea about something and you're really passionate about it, go for it, even though you may not know the how. But if you connect into the reason enough, just go forward and do that. And for me, it was just I'm super passionate about this individual properties of the plant. Like it was so clear to me, because my mom can take CBD and for her, it's a sedative. She doesn't take it to sleep. She takes it for pain. As soon as she takes it and she has insomnia, she goes to sleep. It knocks her out. For me, it does the complete opposite. I don't have anything like that. It's like, I'm okay, CBD, great. So I'm like, we already know. And big pharma, people, they don't do that. It's an individual experience. Everything is personal to the individual. So for us, it's empowering people. So what I did was, I was lucky to grab one of the scientists from the old company that I work with, meet amazing people like Dr. Ethan Russo, Dr. Mike Tagan, who's a prof of pot, and Dr. Chris Spooner, who's an amazing naturopath. So one of the things we did was we did research. The first 6-7 months we launched EndoCanna Health, we looked at every single SNP, which is like a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's just your genes that are unraveled. So it's so you're looking at those specific SNPs that have a direct or indirect association with your endocannabinoid system, and there's a lot of them. And there's some that indirectly even that have an effect. So what we did was we then went to a company called Illumina, and we made a custom chip. We call it a super chip. So what it does, it looks at somewhere around 700,000 different genetic markers, biomarkers, or SNPs. And then we created our kit. And our kit is a at-home, or you can buy it in a store. It's a buccal swab. So think of it as a big Q-tip. You swab the inside your mouth. You put it back in the box. You register. And I want to express this in pause. And it's really important, because there's a lot of fear in people giving their DNA. Oh, you're going to clone me. What are you going to do? You're going to sell my data. Okay. So I want to just say this to everybody so everybody understands. First of all, we have something called a BioVault. And our system is built on, it's HIPAA compliant. I don't know the Australian version of HIPAA, but it's your data is anonymized. So it's privacy. The second part of that is that we're built on Amazon's AWS platform. All your data resides on two different parts of the platform. So your personal information resides on one, your DNA resides in another. You're the only person that has it's encrypted, the decryption code. So if you do not register your DNA, you're going to send it to a lab. We will not know that DNA belongs to you. Also, I cannot pull up your DNA results and go over them with you because I don't know where they are. You have to share your screen with me. So I just want to point out that that's really important. We do collect data, and data is really, really important to us. We don't collect Len May's individual data. We collect 1,000 people that have similar genotypes than me, that took a certain formulation, reported back that was effective for them. So our AI can get better in making suggestions, and we can make better recommendations to the entire industry. So we are collecting data, but I just want to make that clear. So anyway, you send lab. The other part you can do, if somebody has taken a 23andMe or an Ancestry or any of the other genetic tests, you can upload your raw data that you already own and get your results automatically. So once you get your email, your results are ready, you would log into your portal, and there you would have a report that shows about 160 different reports on different symptomatic conditions that you may consume cannabis for, shows you your genotype, shows you what variant was detected, so you have a predisposition to a risk, shows you how to mitigate that risk, also drug-to-drug interaction, and then a formulation suggestion of what would be more optimal for you so you can avoid an adverse event, and then it matches you to products that are available in your area. Obviously, some places don't have products, but so, based on the legalities of, where you are.
Soon, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think what I found from reading over the report, the most important parts for a lot of people would be anxiety, or even the schizophrenia, susceptibilities for high amounts of THC, and even the dependent side of things in terms of, to know drug interactions of how other drugs may be impacting them, not only just the cannabis, and then to use cannabis instead of that. So talk me through just, examples of how you would read the report for things like the anxiety and the schizophrenia, and then the dependent side of things.
Yeah. So anxiety, I like to start with anxiety or mood, because it has a lot to do with endogenous endocannabinoid levels. So some people, so the way you read the report is you have a overview of what the symptomatic condition is. You have a summary of your results. It'll say like you may be more prone to stress, or you may be more prone to anxiety when stressed, based on the average population. If that's the case, you can also see your ancestral heritage, how you compare to other groups. So if you're of European descent versus East Asian descent, you can see how prevalent that is. Everything is supported by peer-reviewed studies. If it doesn't have a study, it will not be included in our report. It has to have studies, and it's a lifetime update. So we're always looking for new studies.
Yep.
We rate those studies and we include them in the report. So the report will show you, like, for stress or anxiety, I can say you may have experienced more anxiety when stressed. There's also a marker for PTSD, for instance. So not only that, if you're experiencing more stress and anxiety, also that can trigger that movie that plays in your head when you have PTSD. So it'll go back to, not only am I experiencing this in the moment, but remember Grandma Mary when, you know, you had an awful experience 2 years ago. Now that brings into your head. Now there's another genotype which is associated with psychosomatic effect, or psychosis-like effects. And now it can trigger, and there's a gene called AKT1 that can be triggered and expressed phenotypically for psychosis. So now there's certain high amounts of THC that can trigger psychosis. And they're very, 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 very small. And I want to just preface, population group that happens. And there is an association with schizophrenia, and it's extremely, extremely small. But if you're prone in a perfect storm, Grandma Mary's a poor metabolizer who eats an edible and has an extremely, difficult experience because of the conversion of 11-oxyhydroxide with your liver. Also, it's a long effect, and it can actually trigger those genes can be turned on just like light switches. So something can be turned on and on and on. In a perfect storm, you can experience psychosis, which we've had people experience from time to time. So when people say there are no adverse effects of cannabis, it's 100% safe. It's like anything else. You can eat too much sugar, you can have too much water, too much caffeine. So being able to understand that is really important. And you were asking me for dependence too. So one of the things that healthcare professionals, they use a report to show people where they may have a predisposition to opioid dependence, for instance. So if they have that, they can suggest cannabis as an alternative to that. They already know, and we have an opiate epidemic. But if healthcare professionals know, maybe I shouldn't prescribe opiate to a person that I can see they have a predisposition to opiate dependence, I think that would be really helpful, and make a suggestion or recommendation to consume cannabis instead.
Yeah, amazing. I'm super excited to actually have mine. I didn't get there yet. I'm saying, as I said to you off the recording, is that I've seen my colleagues, but I'm hanging to get mine done as well to see how I'm reacting to everything. So firstly, in Australia, do we have anyone, or can you actually be sending these tests into Australia at this point in time, or anyone distributing them at the moment?
Yeah, so we're a global company. You can buy our kits at endodna.com anywhere in the world. The challenge is different countries, so Germany and France, for a DNA test, you need to be registered as a medical device. That's not the case exactly in Australia yet. So you can take your swab and you can ship it back. The issue is that shipping it to the US. So we don't have a facility yet in Australia, but we're working on it. We have some partnerships. There's a company called Remediate that partner with us. When regulations ease a little bit, they will be a partner, which is setting up a lab, and we'll be able to replicate our chip in Australia so we can get those done locally. And we're doing that in different places around the world, in Brazil, in the UK, and other places in South America, in Mexico, and in Canada as well. So we're trying to grow as much as possible, but you can buy it and ship it back to the US right now.
Yeah, amazing. And it doesn't take too long. Like we do ship other testing back to Genova Labs, say for example, in America. So it can be done for sure, absolutely. And for those sorts of tests, it's very inconspicuous. So there's not much to them with the swabs. Not very big packages, and that's it.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. All right. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Len, because I really appreciate it. Talk to me a little bit more about, before we leave here, we have touched on it a little bit, but future and regulations, obviously in the US, we've got, as you spoke about, but where do you sort of see in the 10-year plan us being with cannabis, and even in Australia? And I know you're not in Australia, but a little bit more for people, just as a bit of a taster to what you might expect to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah, like I really believe that there's going to be two paths. There will be a pharma path because it has to be. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we're going through all these changes is because we had a supposed plant-derived product that was finally past the FDA, which is the GW Pharmaceuticals. And if you look to see the trajectory of that GW being acquired by Jazz Pharmaceuticals for billions of dollars, that should tell us something. All right, just follow the money. And the money is individual cannabinoids. And by the way, that study that I mentioned, well, it's sponsored by the US Department of Defense for autism. And if you read it, the place where they're getting their CBDV is GW Pharmaceuticals. So there is that patent happening the same way Big Pharma does it with everything else on individual components. So we will have that. There's no avoiding that because there's where the big money is. And once they have a patent and they can get a precision drug, they'll make all their money back. So that's the future. The second part of that is going to be what I consider the nutraceutical type of market.
Yeah.
So you will have indication-specific products, indication-specific products that are consistent, that are tested, that are done the same way that you would get your supplements today, that you would just have cannabinoid substances with that. And then you would have different additives to that also. I still believe there will be, the regular dispensary market where you can get your flower and all that stuff. People will probably grow their own. There'll be all kinds of different technologies in place where you don't have to do your university closet like I used to do. It's like it'll be a little thing. You press a button, bam, you have a plant, and it's dried and it's cured, and you have it. So,
Yeah.
and then I've seen different things where you have individual machines that speak through our database. They can actually create individual products for you or on a more massive scale. So wherever you go, no matter where you are in the world, if you say, I know my formulation is number one that helps me sleep, I can get my number one formulation anywhere, just you would as like the old compounding pharmacy type of thing. Here's all my components. I can make it for you, and I can make it for you to order. One more thing I'm going to predict, because I saw this at the Digital Health Summit.
Yeah.
They now are able to 3D print medication. So they can take one single capsule that has every single one of your medications in one capsule, and you just take it once. And I've seen this. So I think the future of medicine is going to be something like that.
That's incredible and exciting. Wow. I was thinking that when you said the plants, and I was like, yeah, 3D printing may come in there. That would be.
It's already happening. Wow. It's happening because they're doing tissue culture sampling. So you were talking about genetic drift in plant. Well, the one way to avoid that is to do tissue culture sampling. And then they're growing terpenes and other cannabinoids from different substances, like yeast, for instance. So like we have different proteins that you can grow from different substances. We'll do the same thing. Like technology is definitely going to take over. But the difficult thing about technology is you can't replicate the 500 different components. It's a plant. And big ag is going to be a big part of it. So you're going to have big ag here, big pharma here, and then like craft breweries that make beer, like my friends. And say, I have something, a special strain for you. So we'll probably see some of that too.
Yeah, I always think back to like nature. You can't always replicate every single part of that synergism with nature. So it's going to be really interesting to see what is going to come. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one final thing for those who are still, really unsure about trying cannabis, using cannabis, because I get these on a daily basis, because obviously the knowledge and the exposure is not here, particularly in Australia. What would you say to those people who are really skeptical still and think that cannabis is this, this very bad substance? Obviously, we've spoken through so much, but a final departing thought maybe.
I mean, cannabis is illegal for only a political, maybe some racist reasons. It has nothing to do with the plant itself. If you compare this plant to anything else that's already legal, including alcohol, including all the other gateway products, there are no deaths. It does have adverse effects. We already mentioned some of them. I would say do your research. It is safe. Use the endoDNA test to find out what's right for you so you don't have an adverse experience, or, speak to a healthcare professional. But I say, do your research, remove the fear, because it's based on manipulated facts, I would say.
Yeah.
There is no research to support your brain on drugs with cannabis and all the other, Ronald Reagan era stuff and Richard Nixon stuff. There's no science behind it. So if you're concerned, do your research. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to you. Do your own research and find out. If you can show that, all these things are myths that have been suggested in the media. They're not true. Killing brain cells and potheads are lazy and all that stuff. I think the richest man in the world is Elon Musk now, and I think he consumed on the Joe Rogan show. So he obviously inhales, and I don't think he's a dumb person. I don't think cannabis is killing his brain cells. So I would say just do your research, and my parents are a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
They kicked me out. They called the police. My dad thought cannabis was the same as heroin. He had no distinction between the two. But when he tried it himself, he was like, oh, that's it? Cool. I can laugh a little bit, and now I can consume. And so I would just say, just be aware, titrate slow and low, but, give it a shot. I don't think you'll have that kind of bad experience, and you'll get rid of your stigma.
Yeah.
By the media.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll have some munchies.
Yeah. That's probably not that bad a thing. Just have the good stuff on hand.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Think about it. We don't have munchies when our munchies are kicked in.
Yeah.
We don't crave kale. We crave sugar, sweet, and fat. And that's because the amygdala part of our brain is triggered for that, which mimics the way anandamide works. So that's THC.
Giving you more of that bliss if you have to consume it.
Exactly.
So amazing advice. Thank you, Len. Wonderful to speak with you. So knowledgeable. I would love to have you back for round 2 at some point. We can then go through some more of the research that's coming out, and more of what's been happening, in the next sort of year, because I'm sure it's going to move quite fast. And then
let's go over your report.
Absolutely.
You can do the report. We'll go over it with the audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea. Makes me do it then.
Right, let's do it.
Thanks, Len, so much. I look forward to speaking to you soon, and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.